This is an NBC News Special Report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air with breaking news about one of the most infamous murder cases in America, the Menendez brothers killings. Any moment now, we expect an announcement from Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon about a possible recommendation to resentence the brothers. Lyle and Eric are currently serving life behind without parole for the 1989 murder of their parents, Kitty and Jose. The two were shot to death in their Beverly Hills mansion. The case has received fresh attention following a Peacock documentary and a new Netflix series, and after celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Rosie O'Donnell publicly supported the brothers' release. Earlier this month, the Menendez family pleaded for the release of the brothers, arguing new evidence backs their long-standing claim that they acted in self-defense after years of sexual abuse by their father, Jose, who was a high-powered music executive. Today's announcement could pave the way for Lyle and Eric, now 56 and 53, to be freed from their prison near San Diego. Let's go right now to L.A. District Attorney George Gascon, just starting his remarks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And before I begin speaking, I want to also introduce some other people that are here with me, and I hope I'm pronouncing the names right because I've seen handwritten part of it. But I have Ana Maria Barat, Jose Menendez, Jose Menendez and niece Karen Vandermolen, and Kitty's niece. They're all here with us. Also with us here is Brock Lunsford. He's the Assistant Head Deputy for the Post-Litigation Conviction Unit, and Nancy Cervier, who is the Deputy District Attorney in charge of the Resentencing Unit. Let me begin by telling you that this is a case where we've had many people in this office spend a great deal of time reviewing the case. I have to tell you unequivocally that we don't have a universal agreement. There are people in the office that strongly believe that the Menendez brothers should stay in prison the rest of their life, and they do not believe that they were molested. And there are people in the office that strongly believe that they should be released immediately and that they were in fact molested. I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate, and I am going to recommend that to a court tomorrow. What that means in this particular case is that we're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed, and that they will be sentenced for murder, which, because there are two murders involved, that will be 50 years to life. However, because of their age, under the law, since they were under 26 years of age at the time that these crimes occurred, they will be eligible for parole immediately. The teams that have worked on this, on the resentencing side of it, have spent literally probably hundreds of hours by now looking at this case. These cases were originally presented on the habeas side of it, which I'll explain in a moment what that is, last year, and then the request for a prosecutor-initiated resentencing occurred earlier this year. And there have been people in this office working in these cases from the very beginning, as well as many other cases that we have. The reason why I'm here today and why I came in front of all of you about 10 days ago is because there was a more recent documentary about the case that again brought a tremendous amount of public attention. And we know there have been other documentaries, so this is not the first, this is a more recent one. And frankly, our office got flooded with requests for information. And even though this case was already scheduled to be heard in late November, I decided to move this forward because, quite frankly, we did not have enough resources to handle all the requests, and one of the things that I thrive to do in this office is to be very transparent in everything that we do. In this case, we review the prison files. And you have to understand that the way the process works, when you're talking about a resentencing under the law, it really focuses not necessarily on what the original crimes were, but it focuses on, has the person been rehabilitated, number one, and number two, can they be released safely into the community? Under that rubric, since I've been in office, we have resentenced over 300 people, including 28 for murder. Only 4 have reoffended. If that was a regular recidivism rate in this country, we would be the safest nation in the world, but we know that it's not. In fact, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the people that go to prison reoffend and get rearrested. And that's why we have so many problems. However, when you look at the case of the Menendez brothers, you see 2 very young people. One was 19 and the other was 21 when they committed these horrible acts. And I want to underline, they were horrible acts. There is no excuse for murder. And I will never imply that what we're doing here is to excuse that behavior. Because even if you get abused, the right path is to call the police, seek help. But I understand also how sometimes people get desperate. We often see women, for instance, that have been battered for years, and sometimes they will murder their abuser out of desperation. And I do believe that the brothers were subjected to a tremendous amount of dysfunction in the home and molestation. But they went to prison for life without the possibility of parole, which meant that certainly under the law at that time, they had no hopes of ever getting out. They could have done what many other people do, which is basically said, you know what, I'm here for the rest of my life, so I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to join gangs, I'm going to live the life of the prison. But they never did that. To the contrary, even though they didn't think that they would ever be let free, they engaged in a different journey. A journey of redemption and a journey of rehabilitation. And often the people that begin their journey of rehabilitation and redemption in prison is often very internal. And what they do, and one of our lawyers pointed out this today, is usually the path is people try to further their education, do things for self-improvement, which the brothers have done, by the way. But it's more unique or less usual, I guess, when people not only do that, but they also begin to engage in ways to make life for others better. And in this case, the brothers have been doing so for a very long time, creating groups to deal with how to address untreated trauma, creating groups to deal with other inmates that have physical disabilities and may be treated differently. Even in one case, Lyle negotiating for other inmates as to the conditions that they live under during prison. And all this was done by 2 young people, now they're not as young, that had no hopes of ever getting out of prison. They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society, and the system provides a vehicle for their case to be reviewed by a parole board, and if the parole concurs with my assessment, and it will be their decision, they will be released accordingly. I must underline, however, this case will be filed in court tomorrow. The final decision will be made by the judge. Court has to agree with my conclusion that they deserve to be resentenced. It is very possible that there may be members of this office that will be present in court opposing the resentencing. And they have a right to do so. And we encourage those that disagree with us to speak, and the court is the appropriate place to do it. We certainly feel we're very sure not only that the brothers have rehabilitated and that they will be safe to be reintegrated in our society, but that they have paid their dues, not only for the crimes that they committed, but because of all the other things they have done to improve the life of so many others. So, again, we will be filing for resentencing tomorrow. We're seeking that they would be sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, as opposed to life without the possibility of parole, which is they currently have. That means that they would have 50 years to life because there were 2 murders. But because of the age upon which they were convicted, under 26, under current law, that means they're eligible for youthful parole. I think there is also important to have some introspection today, because I think that often, for cultural reasons, we don't believe victims of sexual assault, whether they're women or whether they're men. We saw in our first trial, which, by the way, they were tried twice. The first trial hung, meaning the jury could not come to a conclusion, and in fact, about half of the jury wanted to convict them of manslaughter, which, if that were have been the case, they would have been off prison a long time ago. And then there was a second trial, and then they were convicted of murder with special circumstances, which led to the life without the possibility of parole. But it's salient to understand that our own implicit and sometimes explicit bias around sexual abuse and sexual assaults often leads us to severe injustices in our community. And I want to speak to those that are victims of sexual assault now, whether you're a man or a woman. Know that we're here for you. If you're a victim of sexual assault in this community, and by that we're talking about LA County, not just LA City, you can come for help. Whether you're prepared to prosecute or not, we will be here for you. We have services for you. And if you're prepared to move forward with the prosecution, we will evaluate it as we do any other case. And if we believe that the evidence is there to present a credible case in front of a jury that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, we would proceed accordingly. You do not have to suffer alone. You don't have to keep it to yourself. And help is here unconditionally. I'm going to say a few words in Spanish because I know there's tremendous amount of interest from the Spanish media, and I know that there are going to be other speakers today.
Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon making the announcement that the Menendez brothers, who killed their parents back in the late 80s, will be eligible for resentencing. He will essentially go to the court tomorrow and petition for the resentencing of the brothers. saying because of their age, Laura Jarrett, let me bring you into this, because of their age, they could be eligible to be released virtually immediately.
Yes, because of their age at the time of the murders, they were under 26 years old, just 21 and 18 at the time. That makes them eligible for parole. So let's talk about the reasons that were offered, which are really fascinating if you think about it, Lester. This is a district attorney who campaigned on reform, who has sort of been at the front tier of resentencing efforts like this, facing an enormous amount of pressure from the public, from celebrities to look at this case. And he's laying out the abuse that he says he believes that they suffered at the hands of their father, something that did not come in that second trial. It did come in the first, but not in the second trial. Also talking about the amount of time that they've been behind bars. Obviously, as you said, they were convicted in 1996, have been behind bars for more than 3 decades now. And those two factors leading him to advocating for them to be resentenced now. Under the law, you can be resentenced for what's known in the interests of justice. That's the standard. And one of the criteria is when somebody who is alleging a physical or sexual abuse, like in this case, was not allowed to present that evidence in the time of the original sentencing. And so that's part of the factors that Gascon is mentioning here, talking about how cultural norms on that issue have changed.
And Gascon said he's not making excuses for them, in fact, but he says they have paid their dues. That's his assessment in making this decision. I want to talk about something else we heard here. He was very clear that there is opposition within the DA's office as to whether this is a proper decision, and he suggested that we will see or hear from some of those people from his office when this case goes to the court tomorrow.
Yeah, so pretty interesting and frankly, interesting strategies to sort of get out ahead of what would likely be certain reporting by us and I'm sure other outlets who would be hearing from sources who would be saying there is dissension within the office on this, a split, if you will, about whether they should face resentencing. He said there are people in the office who do not believe that they were actually molested. There are people in the office who believe that they should get out today. And he's suggesting that suggesting that people might actually come and testify or at least present their arguments to the judge tomorrow or in the coming weeks about why they should not be resentenced. Obviously, he believes that they should be. He believes that they should not die in prison. But it would be interesting to hear from members of his office who are currently there if they do choose to actually go in front of the judge and make that case.
All right, let's go back out to Los Angeles where Gotti Schwartz is standing. Gotti, Laura mentioned the kind of pressure there has been on this case, this groundswell really in the wake of these documentaries and investigative reports. Can you describe some of that and how that played into what's just happened?
Yeah, Lester, big news. A lot of people who have been watching this very closely are also right now asking, why now? The DA has had this alleged new evidence for over a year. So the question is it because of all the renewed attention from the new Netflix show and those documentaries that you mentioned, or is it because the election is right around the corner and the DA finds himself right now around 30 points behind in the polls, whatever the reason? So much really culminated last week when we saw the bulk of the Menendez family come together in support of Eric and Lyle Menendez and effectively say they believe the brothers had been the victims of horrific sexual abuse at the hands of their father, Jose Menendez, and they want them released from prison as soon as possible. Now, a quick timeline for those that are tuning in and are unfamiliar with the timeline of how we got here. In 1989, the two brothers shot and killed their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion, and prosecutors say that they were motivated by greed, as evidenced by a shopping spree and this lavish spending after the murders. But the defense claimed that the brothers had been victims of ongoing rape and molestation by their father and killed their parents in self-defense because they feared their parents would kill them to keep the molestation secret. Now, all of that resulted in a hung jury, but that was only the first trial. During the second trial, almost none of the allegations of rape or molestation were allowed to be introduced, and the brothers were convicted and given life without parole. Fast forward to today, Lester. Recently, that new Netflix show, along with the Peacock documentary and several other documentaries, have brought a lot of public scrutiny to the original case with a very different societal understanding now of sexual abuse. And there are also new allegations that Jose Menendez raped a 12-year-old member of the popular Latin band Menudo while he was president of RCA Records. And there's also this letter that's circulating from Eric to a cousin suggesting that the molestation was ongoing and that he still feared his father 8 months before the murders. Important to note that at least one uncle of the Menendez brothers does not want them released. He has filed an amicus briefing with the court, so we'll see how that plays out, as well as the possibility of members of the DA's office also arguing against the resentencing that we've heard of today.
All right, Gotti Schwartz in Los Angeles, and let me bring Laura back into this. So the way this was described by the DA, that this could almost lead to an immediate release, but it does go to a judge, and I would think this is not something they rush or take, you know, politely.
Right. So this is not happening in a vacuum, and it's not entirely up to the DA. Obviously, he gets to make the petition for resentencing, essentially a recommendation to the judge that he believes that they should not be behind bars. But the judge is going to look at this case objectively and decide whether or not that he agrees with that petition. If he does agree with that petition, and he already has a petition for their freedom pending before him, it's what's known as a habeas petition. They filed that more than a year ago. He already has that in front of him. But if the judge, now looking at this with the DA's recommendation, agrees that they should be resentenced, I should say, then it's still going to be up to the parole board, because as the district attorney laid out, they're eligible for parole. It doesn't mean they just walk out the day that the judge says so. It still has to go through the normal process.
Why is a new trial not on the table?
It's because of partly how they've structured this. If they had gone through a different route, which is a much more lengthy process and sort of a long shot process, if you will, that habeas route in front of the judge, then they could potentially be eligible for a new trial. But because they've gone through this resentencing route, which the district attorney said only 28 people have actually been resentenced under this new policy that's been in place since roughly 2021. Thousands of petitions are pending. So this is not as if it comes up very often. And to Gotti's point, it raises the question of why now? Why did the Menendez brothers case get so much attention and allow this public pressure campaign that's happening just around the district attorney's reelection?
And Gotti, if I still have you, let me ask you about this new evidence that I guess has been discussed in some of these programs. Do we know if it is in fact new and it is compelling evidence that potentially moves the needle in the story?
Well, at this point, it's difficult to characterize it as evidence legally because it hasn't been introduced into court. A lot of it has been found by journalists. There was a journalist that discovered this letter that was allegedly written from Eric to one of his cousins, and that was found in drawers. Apparently, this journalist had asked, hey, can I go through some of the old stuff from back in the day? The family granted him access, and then he found this letter that seemed to suggest that molestation was going on 8 months before the killings happened. So that would need to be officially introduced into evidence, but that was provided to the DA's office quite some time ago. And then the second piece is an affidavit by a member of the band Menudo, who was 12 at the time, who said that he was raped by Jose Menendez when RCA Records was entering an agreement with the band Menudo. He has testified about that, and he entered an affidavit. Again, neither one of those things have officially been entered into the court of record here.
All right, Gotti Schwartz in Los Angeles. Laura, thank you to both. That concludes this NBC News Special Report. For more coverage, tune into our streaming channel, NBC News Now, and online at NBCnews.com. We'll have an interview with the DA coming up here on Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, and good day.